Welcome to the Beacon Hill Podcast, helping you grow in your faith and shine for Christ. Thanks for joining us. Now here are your hosts, Pastor G.J. Farmer and the Beacon Hill Baptist Church staff.
Well, hello again. Another episode of the podcast. We took a couple weeks off. This is our first one, putting this out on a Monday. So we're trying something new, recording this prior to the service on Sunday, just that way you can kind of have it out the gate to start your week, and hopefully Mondays give everybody kind of a longer time to listen to it and until the next sermon on the following Sunday. So hope your Monday's going well. Do you all like Mondays?
I'm kind of like Garfield, not a big Monday guy. You know?
Same. Yeah.
So there are a couple of days for me that typically have a very like rigid structure. Mm-hmm. Mondays and Thursdays are kind of those days for me. And so I like Mondays all right. I think I'm kind of at a place like, because I'm getting up, taking Jack to school and stuff like that on Monday mornings and really every day. I'm kind of at a place, we've got a fly or something around here.
Yeah.
That's going to get on my nerves. Anyway, I'm kind of at a place that I'm up and going anyway. So Monday, I mean, yeah.
I mean, Sunday, obviously, best day of the week, Sunday.
But that Sunday high.
Friday's my favorite day of the week.
Okay. Well,
I like a good Friday.
What about you, Josh? You a Monday guy?
Not really.
Are you an any day guy?
Yeah.
What day is your day?
What day is my day? Probably Friday.
Okay.
I like Fridays. I do love Sundays, of course, but then Monday I'm just like, oh, yeah, Sunday. So tired.
Well, hopefully your Monday's going well as you listen to this. We've got an important passage to dig into today. We talked about this, obviously, now that you're listening to this on Monday. We talked about this yesterday at the church. We've been going through Luke chapter 9 the last few weeks. We're on verses 23 through 27. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to read kind of 2 or 3 verses in the beginning here just to set the stage for what we're talking about. As we go, we'll probably read a couple more verses as we go. But anyway, it says, by the way, this is Jesus talking to his disciples. It says, then he said to them all, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me will save it. So we'll read some more verses in just a second. But obviously Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow after me, there are 3 things he says to do here. 1, let him deny himself, let him take up his cross daily, and then follow me. I want to talk about each of those a little bit. I know we talked about those yesterday in the service, but and thinking about the idea of like denying ourselves. When you think about that and it jumps in your mind, like the original picture of what it looks like to deny yourself, I think one of the things that we think of or that I think of, like just that mental picture is like almost like being on a diet or something where you got the cookies in the cabinet and you're like, no, I'm not going to eat those. And you're like denying yourself certain things. I think there's part of this, like sometimes that Christians throughout the centuries have taken too far in a view called asceticism, where it's this idea of like denying anything that would be pleasurable, denying anything that would be good. And obviously there's an element to just the world in general. Like God made a beautiful world for us to live in and to enjoy. And so like, for instance, the other day, Joel and I, we went golfing, and it was like one of the prettiest days, like this past week, prettiest days that we've had in a long time. And it was enjoyable, not just the game, although I'll say the game wasn't that enjoyable because you beat me.
Yeah, you enjoyed it because of the great company.
I enjoyed the company. I enjoyed the weather.
Joel enjoyed the spoils of victory.
Yeah. I'll get them next time. Anyway, but so like there's part of that, like, yeah, we do enjoy the world. I enjoy being with my family. I enjoy going to a ball game. And so we're not talking about like denying yourself anything that would be fun. That's not what Jesus is talking about. So Joel, expand on this. We talked about this some during the sermon, but what does it look like to deny yourself, like in practical terms? What is Jesus talking about here?
I think Jesus is talking about living a life that's fully submitted to his will. It's living a life for his will. And not that we won't have any pleasure or satisfaction when we live for his will, but it's a denial of really our hearts, our sinful natures that we're born with. I'm thinking of, for instance, this week in Beacon Students, we studied about the rich young ruler. And Jesus looked at his life and asked him, basically, have you kept these commandments? And the rich young ruler Jesus named a bunch of the commandments, and he was like, yeah, I've done all those. I'm good. But then Jesus mentions one last thing, his possessions, and tells him to sell all his possessions and follow him. And the man after that just turns away in sorrow, and that was the one thing that he was not willing to give up in his life to follow Jesus. And it's not that it's sinful to be rich. That's not what Jesus is trying to say, because there are many people that God gives blessings who love Jesus and are living a life according to his will. It's the fact that Jesus laser pointed to that man's heart and the thing that was keeping him away from following him with his whole heart. And it's this idea of what's the thing in our life that we need to deny ourselves? Is it this need to be known for fame or power? Is this need to have a bunch of things? Is it a need to fill ourselves with all these pleasures in the world? Is it a need to work constantly? Is it a need to get out of work constantly? So many different things. But this idea of what in our heart is keeping us, do we love more than Jesus? And that's the thing that we need to deny ourselves of and follow him.
As I think about desires, so Jesus talks about, and we're going to get into this more in just a second, but Jesus here mentions if anybody wants to follow after me. It's a desire to follow Jesus. I think one of the things that happens when we first start thinking about following Jesus, there's this inner conflict of two desires meeting. We desire to follow Jesus, and we desire to live for ourselves. And so there are these two desires, and at the end of the day, or really I guess at any part of the day, but at some point, we have to say, like, which desire are we going to chase after? Because we can't have, and that's what Jesus is saying here, like, you can't have it both ways. You can't desire to follow me and desire to follow yourself and do both things. Either way, you're going to go one or the other, and whichever decision you make is going to have a certain outcome. And so here we're talking about desiring Jesus versus desiring sin and acting on that sin. So if we desire Jesus, those sinful desires that we have to push those away. And that's what denying ourselves is. Like, we're going to push those desires away. So I think that's super important to remember. Like, those things aren't compatible. And there are a lot of Christians who are living in some ways like they are, and God is not pleased with that. We are called to push away our old sinful desires. And there's part of it that's like, we think, okay, isn't God the one who does that? God's the one who changes our hearts and changes our minds and grows us and makes us more like him and gives us the fruit of the Spirit. And yeah, he does. But he does that through our obedience to his command. And what we see here in this passage is like plenty of commands that Jesus gives us on what it looks like to follow him. And it's not like, oh, if you want to follow me, just desire to follow me and read the Bible or whatever. No, we see commands, actions given to us to say, this is what it looks like to follow me, and you got to do these things. And obviously, what we're finding here, like, this isn't easy stuff. It's counting the cost. It's realizing what we're signing up for, that it's more than just a good feeling. What we're signing up for when we follow Jesus is more than just going to church. It's more than just wanting to follow Jesus. And we're going to get more into that in just a second. But he says to deny himself and take up his cross daily. Now, it's interesting. He mentions both of these things, the idea of taking up a cross and it being daily. This taking up the cross being connected to what they had just discussed in the prior verses, where Jesus tells them, like, hey, I'm going to die. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to die, and I'm going to be resurrected. And if you follow me, essentially, in some ways, you're following me to the cross. But it's a daily thing. Why do you think Jesus emphasizes, like, the daily aspect of this when taking up our cross? And how does that change maybe how we look at faith, or how we look at what it looks like to be a Christian? Because, like I said, a lot of people, they maybe would read this verse, and if it looked like practice, would be like, take up your cross once a week.
Right.
Take up your cross on Sunday and follow me. But that's not what it says. So how does that change how we think about faith and how we think about what it looks like to follow Jesus?
Yeah. So, so many people can sometimes get caught up on salvation being just like a single act, like, oh, once I, pray a prayer or walk an aisle, and, that's it, I'm good, for the rest of my life. Or they just equate being a Christian or following Christ, just on a Sunday, going to church attendance and things like that. But, this word daily here, it stresses the ongoing commitment, the burden, what can be as you as you follow Christ, that it's not just a single decision. That, hey, you're signing up for a lifetime commitment to follow Jesus. It's in each day you're going to wake up, and it's a conscious choice. Like you just mentioned, you have a battle where you say, am I going to follow the world and what I want to do, or am I going to follow Jesus? Am I going to do this every single day? Because we know that, we could struggle with just compartmentalizing everything we do as a Christian on a Sunday or a Wednesday night. And having that relationship with God, expressing your faith, is a daily thing that he asks and requires of us, to spend time in the Word, to spend time sharing, the gospel Monday through, Saturday, just as much as Sunday. So
when we're living out our faith, it's a call to do the things of Jesus. And we're going to see here, he expresses, like, not being ashamed of him, putting aside, we just talked about our own sinful desires and wanting to follow him, and actually following him every single day. As we think about that, I think it's important to consider what that looks like as a daily decision. Sunday, so I'm recording this prior to Sunday, so I'll say this. My intention is to share this message or this illustration Sunday. If for some reason I didn't, I'll sound silly saying that I did, so I'm just giving that caveat. But it's like marriage. So every day we wake up, we're making a conscious decision to love our spouse. And there was a point in time, so you look back, there was a point in time where you took the vows, you took the commitment, and you can look back to that one moment. But yet, to truly love your spouse, it's a daily decision. You can't just say, well, remember I took those vows at one time, so it doesn't really matter how I treat you now, or it doesn't really matter what I do now. That's not how it works. You took those vows because, you were signing up for that commitment, and you love your spouse, and you were stepping into that relationship. But then at that point, to truly love your spouse, it's a daily decision to do that. That's how it looks with Jesus as well. There's a point in time that we make a decision to follow him. We give him our hearts and lives and submit to him. But then the day-to-day of really following him, what that looks like is a daily decision to do what he says and to love him and submit to him. And I think for all of us, like, if you put this in the context of marriage, and again, I think I've mentioned this several times on Sunday. I think marriage and having kids, like both of those things in life, teach us a lot about the gospel. And so if you've been blessed to have one of those relationships or both, it can do a wonder in teaching you about that. But I think in thinking about marriage, like if at any point you decide, well, I'm not going to love them, or I'm not going to do whatever it means to be married, then I think the question would be, well, did you even mean your vows in the first place? And that's the same is true with us. Like we can say, hey, I want to submit my heart and life to Jesus and make a decision like you may have made it at Bible school as a kid, or as an adult at some point you realize what you've done. And then if at some point we're like walking away and say, no, I'm not doing that, then the question could come up, well, did you really mean it in the first place? Because it is a decision, a daily decision that we're signing up for, to take up our cross and follow Jesus. And so as we think about that, as I was reading this passage, it seemed weird to me that it said, if anyone wants to follow me, do these things and follow me. Why did Jesus say this twice? The first part is talking about a desire, to have a desire to follow Jesus. The last part is talking about actually doing that, to actually follow him. And it has to be clear in our, like, we have to understand very clearly there is a difference between having a desire to follow Jesus and actually following him. Joel, what do you see as being the difference there, and why is that so important? Because I think there are a lot of people who go to church who say things like, well, I want to love Jesus, or I do love Jesus. Like I have this desire to follow him. But come Monday morning or whenever, you have that juxtaposition again of the desire to follow Jesus versus the desire to give into our sinful nature. And then it kind of goes, well, I have this desire to follow Jesus and this, so I'm trying to choose. Like, why does it matter that following Jesus is more than just a desire to do that?
Yeah, I think, there are several places in the Bible we see people struggle with this very thing, where they desire for the good things of God, but they don't desire obedience to it. They don't take that step. And we know that walking with Jesus is so much more than just knowledge. Walking with Jesus is so much more than just even good feelings for Jesus. It's this idea that you're willing to desire it so much that you obey, you give your whole life to it, you submit to it. Did y'all ever have MySpace when we were younger? You remember that website?
Dude, I learned to edit HTML because of MySpace.
Hey,
Did you ever get into that?
I didn't get into that, no.
I really got into that because I would change different, well, I don't remember what all I changed, like background colors and stuff like that on there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I changed my background. But if you're not familiar with that, they had this feature where I think it was like you could put like your top 4 friends.
Oh, dang, I forgot about that.
Top 5.
Top 5, top 8. I can't remember.
Okay, would I be in your top 5?
Yeah, man.
Right now?
Yeah.
Because now we have
For
a
sure.
phone.
For sure.
You could put your top.
And see,
So I would be in your top 5?
Back then, if you had a girl you were interested in, you might
Uh-oh. Was
throw
Leslie
her
in your number
there.
1?
I didn't know her during the MySpace
okay.
days. But the reason I brought that up is I think about like a lot of people might have Jesus in their top 5. They love Jesus. They know that he's good. They have affection for him, but he's not getting that number 1 spot. And it's not enough in our
Dude, that
lives.
illustration would have killed 20 years ago.
Yeah,
man.
it's just too late. It's just too late.
Right in there.
But I thought about it, and we're going with it, right?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
A lot of us have this desire towards Jesus, but we're not willing to bump him up to the number 1 thing to take that step, right? So many things in our life. Of course, I'd love to eat healthier, or I'd love to exercise, or I'd love to have a stronger relationship with my kids, but it's not till we desire it so deeply that we're willing to take the steps it takes to follow
Mm-hmm.
and to build those things. And the same way with Jesus.
A lot of people want to get ripped, but they don't want to put in the work.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's a good illustration.
Yeah.
I'd love to get ripped, but I'm not going to put in the work. So when you think about it, a lot of people would love to follow Jesus, but they don't want to do the things that it takes to follow him. So I'm going to push back just a little bit, not necessarily push back, but just throw in another angle of this. We hadn't planned to talk about this, but this came to my mind. So at the last church I was at, had a guy who came in, started visiting the church, who got worked up and bent out of shape because I preached that, like, to follow Jesus and really become a Christian, like, you made him the Lord of your life and you submit your life to him and you're signing up for a life that looks like this. And he said, like, how could you think that and not think that you're doing works to be saved? If you've got to do these things to follow Jesus, and if you don't do these things, like, how is that not works? And he just couldn't wrestle with that. And he was all about, like, all I have to do is believe and all I have to do is trust. And basically whatever obedience, and he didn't say this directly, but this is what I got. Whatever obedience that I do after I believe is just like icing on the cake. It's not a command necessarily or requirement. It's like just, I'm doing that because I want to do it. And if I do it, then it's like, okay, well, that's good on me for doing it or whatever. But that doesn't save me, so it's not a requirement. I think we have to be careful with that thinking for several reasons. One is Jesus is very clear what it looks like to follow him. At the same time, the Bible is also very clear that works, they don't save us. So we know that doing these things don't save, but these are the actions of what a saved person, like what it will look like in their heart because they want to follow Jesus. It's kind of like, we can use that analogy, and I'm just kind of thinking through this right now in my head, but we can use the analogy with that, for that with marriage as well. If you want to be married, you take the vows, and then you, like, love your spouse or whatever. Loving them every day and choosing them every day isn't what makes you married. And you can stop this train if this is a bad analogy, but I'm just thinking of this as I go here. Loving your spouse every day and choosing them every day, that's not what makes you married. But when you are married and you make that covenant, you're going to do that every day. Like, that's what that means. Does that illustration work? I think it works. Sometimes you start thinking through something and there's a point that it just breaks down and falls apart. But you get what I'm saying, hopefully. So I don't know. What are your all's thoughts on that?
I think John 15, and if you go to our church and we sing that song, Abide, it comes out of that passage. This idea of this fruit that we bear, these works, have to be in the context of abiding, remaining in Jesus. And if we're doing those works outside of being in that relationship, in the power of Christ, then that's just what they are. They are works. I mean, maybe I can stretch it to your marriage illustration of, like, if I was to give my wife flowers every day and to take care of her, but I don't talk to her that whole time. I'm just doing these good works of marriage, but there's no real connection between us relationally, then that's probably not a very good marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on. You can do the cricket sound.
Hang on.
All right.
Man, I should have had that pulled up. Why didn't I? All right, so we've got this soundboard here that does several things. I told Joel beforehand when it goes quiet, I'm going to just do the crickets.
Had to be after I said something. Yeah. I noticed, not after he said something.
Do you have the one where the train crashes?
No, I don't. I should load that one in. So, man, we had it going so well, and then it just, like, Somebody probably thought their stereo went out or something for about 5 seconds. So thinking about all of those things, obviously following Jesus is about more than just a desire to follow him. Obviously following Jesus is about more than just praying a prayer or making an initial commitment. It's about a daily commitment, a daily decision. And then he goes on to say, like, okay, this is what, like, you have an option here. These are the things that you're choosing from. He says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. In other words, like, if you're trying to hold on to those desires and your old ways and follow the way that you want, eventually it's going to cost you everything. And it may not seem like it will in this life, but in eternity, of course, it's going to cost you everything. Then whoever loses his life, talking about the here and now, to say, hey, I'm giving it all over to Jesus. I'm going to follow him. Whoever loses his life because of me will save it. And then he goes on to say, I'll just read 25 and 26 because it's kind of similar, just different angles. For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory, and that of the Father and of the holy angels. So that last part, let me just mention, is for, like, these commands are for people who are wrestling with, am I going to follow Jesus or not? We're not talking about losing your salvation. We're not talking about, like, you were a Christian and then at some point you, like, denied Jesus, and, like, that's the unpardonable sin. That's not what we're talking about here. Like, we even see Peter deny Jesus and then Jesus restores him. So I know some people have thought that this is what this is talking about. Like, this is, like, if you're ashamed of Jesus, if you ever deny him, then that's the unpardonable sin. So that's not what this is talking about. So in thinking about all of these things, like, how does this idea challenge sometimes how we think about security, success, or comfort when it comes to following Jesus? Because I know a lot of times, if we're honest, our prayers are around those things. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. Like, every night with our kids when we pray, we usually pray for a good night's sleep. We pray for God to be with us the next day. There are times that when somebody's sick, like, we're going to pray for them to have health. And I don't think those things are bad to pray for. We see those things in Scripture to pray for those things. But we have also the reality that sometimes following Jesus brings in the idea that it's not going to be about security, success, or comfort. How do you see this as challenging that, Josh? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this verse, Luke 9:24, it really is not just about passively, like we said, believing in Jesus, but it focuses on how do you translate that to actively, daily surrendering to him. Being a Christian, again, this verse confronts the idea that it's not going to be a good, perfect life. I talked a little bit about in a class I was teaching about kind of the health and wealth gospel, where they promise, hey, God wants to bless you and your life's going to be great. And we look in the Bible and it's the exact opposite, really, because when you're a Christian, you want to seek out the comforts of the world, but you know that because you follow Christ, that is not promised. We can't avoid the suffering that comes with it. It kind of shifts the source of our comfort. Instead of seeking out the worldly possessions or things like that, the world's comfort, we seek out comfort in Christ. And what we gain by suffering for him, suffering for him, we come out on the other side, and we should have a deeper relationship with him, a better understanding of what it means to be a Christian, and it also should help us love him more.
So if you've thought, if I follow Jesus, that it means I'm going to have security or success or comfort or any of these things, I'll just say, like, there may be seasons of that for you. There may be Christians who have that, but it's not like it's because that's part of God's plan for their life or for that season. And honestly, like let's get, if we're just being real, in Somerset, Kentucky, 2025, as compared to some remote village across the world or some country where it's illegal to be a Christian, you'll get your head cut off.
Yep.
Like, what are we going to go through here that really, like, I mean, we've got it made as far as being a Christian, even today. Like, our faith is not challenged or tested in ways that the early church was, or even that people, like I said, in places like Iraq or other places like that are being challenged today. So we've got it made. So when you're thinking about like losing your life and things like that, most of us will never see an opportunity where physically that will happen. We might, but most of us won't. But where we do still lose it is to say, like, okay, there are certain things that we are not going to participate in because we're Christians. There are certain relationships that maybe we have to cut off because we're Christians. There are certain places, or we talked about recently this men's night that we're going to have in October, all about pornography and the dangers of it. There are certain things that we're not going to watch or look at because we're Christians. You know, there are certain things that we have to say, okay, we're setting parameters on that. And so if you say, hey, like, okay, that's a discomfort because of following Christ or whatever, I think really we have it a lot easier than some people. And if the worst thing that we ever face because we follow Christ is like we don't get to participate in a certain sin that we wanted to. Like, yeah. I mean, we're looking at it wrongly anyway. We shouldn't, like, that's not going to be helpful to us anyway. And so, yeah. So anyway, that's a tangent that I need to stop. All right. A couple more things quickly, then we'll kind of wrap up. Verse 25, it says, "For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits himself?" It's very interesting how we can look to people who have a lot of money or have certain things like notoriety. I mean, even things like clout. Is that still a word? Mm-hmm. Like, I know it's a word, but is it still
influence?
Oh yeah,
I like that.
That's probably better. Social influence. Did the teens say? Should I say the teens?
Teens, yeah.
Do they say clout?
No.
Okay, so that's not a word. That would date me
a little bit.
What's the word? Is it influence?
I don't have a replacement right at the top of my head.
Okay. Well, for most of the people who are listening, they know what I'm talking about.
They do.
So if that's the thing that you chase after, like there are people who have the influence or clout or whatever you want to say, the money, the nice material things, houses, cars, all that, and they're not following Jesus at all. In fact, they may be getting their money, like it's very easy to look to the world and say, man, look at all these people who are wealthy, who are, for instance, like putting out music about nothing but sinful things, or they're making movies that are nothing but sinful, or they are taking advantage of people at their work, or lying in business to get ahead. A lot of different things, and they're making a lot of money and getting by with it. And then you see people who are going to church trying to follow Jesus, and it's like, man, some of those people, like, they're living paycheck to paycheck. How does that work? Why is that? And this goes back to what we just talked about, the idea like that challenges security, success, comfort. There are going to be times that we follow Jesus that we don't have those things. But that being said, why do you think it's easy sometimes to say, well, if I just didn't follow Jesus, or if I just got involved in that sin, or twisted that thing at work, or manipulated those numbers in some way on that spreadsheet or whatever, like that would help me out and nobody would really know, or whatever. Why does it seem maybe tempting for us to trade eternal value for a temporary gain? And what can we do maybe to help our perspective stay where it needs to be? What are your thoughts on that? I think that's a pretty heavy question.
Yeah, I think, it's this idea of, we are physical and spiritual, but the physical's right here in front of us. It's so easy to just keep our eyes on what's around us all the time. But, Paul encourages us in Colossians 3 to set our mind on the things above where Christ is. And it can be hard to have that eternal perspective, that this is a race. I think of those videos I see sometimes where, they place a cookie in front of a kid and said, you can have this one cookie now, or if you wait 5 minutes, I'll give you a whole pack of cookies. And most of the time, the kids just go ahead and take one and pop it in and eat it, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's right there in front of them, and they don't have that perspective yet. And so many of us don't have that spiritual perspective. But Jesus promises if we, are willing to deny the world here, our brothers and sisters and family and the houses, he says this in Mark 10, that we'll receive 100 times more than what this world can give us. And that's very true.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, like, on the flip side, when we sign up to follow Jesus, there is a cost, but we're going to get so much more in the end. When we go follow the world, like, yeah, we might seem to get more in the beginning, but there's going to be a greater cost in the end. One of the illustrations that I was thinking through for the sermon Sunday, which again, while you're listening to this, I may or may not have said this illustration, but I do think it's fitting. It's almost like if you're buying, just use the analogy of buying a vehicle. You have the option to pay cash up front if you're going to buy this vehicle, or you have the option to finance it. Now, take out the point of this illustration, like take out the fact that for a lot of people, like just from a purely like practical standpoint with a vehicle, it makes sense to finance, right? Okay, so take that out and just say those two options. Paying cash up front versus financing. Okay, paying cash up front, there's going to be a cost, a greater cost initially. You're not going to have that money sitting in the bank. You got to put more money up front. You got to like drop it all down. But what's going to be better in the end is that, one, you get that vehicle like you own it, and two, like you're not going to have all these payments and all this other stuff. But if you finance it, okay, you might seem to have more in the beginning, but in the end, you're going to be paying way more doing that. And I think it's a very similar thing. Like there's a cost either way when you look at what Jesus is calling us to do. We can either follow him and reap way more eternal benefits with that initial cost of like submitting to him. Yeah, there's a cost. Or we can continue in our own way, and in the end, the cost is going to be far greater and far more serious than we could ever imagine. And so we have to balance that out and say, like, okay, now we're at this fork in the road, again, where we desire to follow Jesus maybe, and we desire to follow our or do our own thing. And so now which cost are we signing up for? You got the dotted line there. Which line are you going to sign? And I think we all have to consider that. And Jesus even goes so far to say this, and we'll kind of wrap up with this idea. In verse 26, he says, whoever's ashamed of me and my words, basically I'm going to be ashamed of you. Again, this isn't talking about an unpardonable sin or anything like that. But when we're thinking about being ashamed of Jesus, there are a lot of ways that we can be ashamed of him. And what he's saying is that someone who truly wants to follow me and truly is, I guess I need to specify, truly is following me, not just wants to, is following me, he's not going to be ashamed. She's not going to be ashamed. And so what does that look like in practical terms of following Jesus, like being ashamed versus unashamed? Because I don't want us to think this is like the unpardonable sin. Mm-hmm. I'm not giving us a pass to do it, but like we're not talking about something that can't be forgiven. But what does it look like to be ashamed of Jesus?
Yeah, I think this word ashamed, kind of, to me, it means more than just like, oh, I'm just kind of embarrassed to be associated with Jesus. To me, it's kind of a rejection of following him or wanting to do it. This verse to me, it kind of clarifies your priority when you say, to be ashamed of Jesus' culture. What is your priority of comfort? If you say, I prioritize following Christ and all that has to do, with suffering with him, with persecution, or do I prioritize my personal comfort? And, I want the world's success. I want to do what the world says, that could bring, I want human approval or the social standing that comes with certain jobs or whatever it is, where you prioritize that, and in that, if it goes against what Christ demands of us, asks of us, then we are openly rejecting him. We're saying, yeah, I want to go this way because the road is easy and it's wide and it's fun and it's comfortable. And what does Jesus say? No, the road to follow me is narrow, and it's hard. And so being ashamed of him, to me, that's just what it looks like.
And so for you in your own life, I think it's good to assess, like, not just do I want to follow Jesus, but am I following Jesus? And what does that look like in my life? Like, am I doing some things that would classify me as being ashamed of Jesus or not willing to sign up for the things that he's called me to do? I do think it can be very easy to join in with the crowd or with the world and do what they want to do instead of what Jesus wants you to do. I do think it can be very easy to say, hey, I'm a proud Christian on Sunday morning, but then like you wouldn't deny Jesus, especially like with your words, but then maybe you don't look like a Christian the rest of the week. And then again on Sunday, like, okay, you're taking up your cross on Sunday and following him, but Monday through Saturday you're not. Or there may be certain points, like at home or at work, you look the part, but in all reality, like that's not, like you're just looking the part. Unfortunately, all too many times, like if you stay in a church or the church long enough, you're going to see people who, like, eventually it's just like, okay, they just look the part. And I'll be honest, like all of us, we struggle in some ways with that back and forth of the desire to follow Jesus versus to do our own thing. And there are all times that we fall short. There are all times that, as I think about, like, one of the things I thought about with this verse is that we take up our cross daily and follow him. And the days that we haven't done that well, like, those are the days that we remember that ultimately we're not saved by us carrying the cross. We're saved because Jesus carried the cross. And I think that it's important to remember that on those days that maybe we are ashamed or we do fall short, like we have the fact that Jesus carried the cross to lean upon, not that we're saving ourselves by doing all these things. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Well, let me just say, it's been great hanging out with you today, whether you're listening to this on Monday or some other time in the week. If you don't have a church home, we'd love for you to get connected here at Beacon Hill. We've got groups at 9:15 and Bible study at worship, not Bible study. Groups are our Bible study. Worship at 10:30 as well on Sunday. We'd love for you to come out for that. And if you know somebody who maybe would benefit from this podcast or something, feel free to share it. Couple other announcements I wanted to make. Reminder about our men's event that's coming up in October. I shared about that Sunday. We'll be talking about that, not every week, but especially as we get closer to it, we'll be talking about it. But I did want to say, if you're unaware, We also have a podcast for all the sermons here. If you just search in your podcast platform, Beacon Hill Sermons, I think they'll come out up that way. If not, you can go to our website and find them. But anyway, we're glad you joined us. Good to see you guys.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hopefully this podcast helps somebody if they have a case of the Mondays.
I figured I'd finish with that. All right. You guys have a good rest of your week.
You've been listening to the Beacon Hill Podcast. For more information about Beacon Hill Baptist Church, visit beaconhillbaptist.com.